Hello and welcome to Weltall podcast, where 6 months of waiting can last us an entire hour. I'm your host, Senior of Whiteline, and as usual, we've got Zach on the line. Hey Zach,
Hello. Hello.
how's it going?
All right. Pretty good. Not a whole lot of news. Regarding Diaz. Though
Yeah,
I did get the swim to Tapestry today, so that's really fun.
yeah, that's something. And
This
meanwhile,
is.
people are getting their Mavlov ship
Yep.
shipments, so
Yeah. It's the end of all days.
surprisingly, I do think DS started after Mavlov, right?
No. Yeah. This actually didn't take that long to arrive. Like it felt long,
Yeah, yeah,
but
right.
compared to other Kickstarters, it actually arrived in like a year or so. So that's not that bad.
Yeah,
There is worse.
and hopefully it won't matter to us that much again. But anyways, as you said, we don't really have a lot of news happening this week, uh, which is probably not a good thing, but I don't think we will wait that long until we get another update of the Pantheon website or anything like that.
That's not to say that Light aren't updating stuff. It's just not like the most exciting news.
Yeah, yeah, I suppose you could say that. Anyway, so for today we are going to discuss the last 6 episodes of the anime adaptation, which came out about 2 weeks ago. We will discuss the anime in general, as now we can uh, judge it in its entirety. We will answer some of your questions, which you did ask us after our last episode. And yeah, we will discuss some news which we did get, even if it's not much. And I suppose that's where we will start, as just today we got an official website for the Switch version of Dies Irae. And that's basically all there is to say about it, because it's pretty empty right now. Well, I mean, there isn't much they could put it over there, because we already know all the characters, we already know the general story, and basically the only thing they can do is to post the release date, which they did, post the price, which they did, and post any extra materials which we will get in that version, which they also did. Anyway, that's actually not anything new to us, as we discussed over the last few episodes. The Switch version is going to include a new extra scenario, which will be connected to the Pantheon in some way. Well, we do
We
have
can
a
spec. We can speculate. Yes.
yeah, we do have a rough idea of what it's going to be. It will feature quite a couple of gods talking to each other, and now we can assume that it will heavily feature Mithra, or Shinga, or the Truth, or the First God.
Yeah. Actually, the site kind of did add something new, which it gave us the name, which is Sashonyate Desatir.
Yeah,
And beneath that, it had an inscription that says, Savior of the Divine Throne. And below that, we have an image of Mithra.
yeah, which we did
Now,
already have on the Pantheon
we no,
website.
it's the image we already had. But there's points I kind of want to mention is that if you look at the image, there's like a reflection of the same of the inscription below that, like a reflection, like a mirrored reflection,
Yeah, yeah,
and below that and specifically they bring Mithra. Now it's possible to brought Mithra because that's the new goddess we have, so they wanna that's the design they went with because they're not gonna dump a new design on us without just like that without updating
yeah. Who would
the
ever
program.
want that?
That's it. Yeah, but I think that like the idea of Savior of the Throne and Sashayat being a Zoroastrian term may kind of relate to Mithra heavily, as if to say that Mithra is the savior of the throne.
Yeah, I suppose I can see that. Although, since it is, after all, a DS game, I actually believe that it's related to Ren in some way.
Well,
Even
we
if,
don't. Well, of course, we don't know yet. But
yeah, yeah,
the feeling I'm getting, and another thing we got, which once again, Yoxa Loyal mentioned this, is that in the background we actually have an high quality image of Mithra's throne.
yeah.
So now we finally have that.
Well, even if it's just like 1/3 of it, the
Well,
core of it, so to
well,
say.
people have extracted it. People
Yeah,
have
yeah.
extracted the image, so
And we also got a clear shot on the. I
the new art.
probably can't call it a packaging illustration because it doesn't actually have a packaging for now. But yeah,
Yes,
it's a feature image. It has Ren and Mari and some vaguely familiar faces on Ren's guillotine wings. Uh, so
yes,
it's actually not the first time we see it. We did see it on the official streams. However,
but
we didn't see it in that in this good quality. So now we can actually see that besides Mercurius Reinhardt,
there's
uh,
also Mithra.
yes, there's also Mifra, and this is another reason why everyone speculates that Mifra is going to be the protagonist, so to say, of the Actor scenario, because she's featured on the
And
cover,
the,
so to
yes, and
say.
yes, and the new key visual, as it
Yes.
were. Another point that Loyal Yoxel also mentioned is that we got a new icon for Dies Irae Amantis Amentis, which is interesting,
Yeah,
especially since they didn't change the subtitle, which is Konosetsu ni Ayokoego. Let this moment surpass love.
yeah, yeah,
So they did keep the old subtitle and the Amantis Amentis naming, but we have a new logo, which is different from the anime and from the game's logo.
yeah,
So that's interesting.
yeah, and it also resembles a scar in some way.
I guess you could see it as the scar, definitely, yes.
Yeah. Anyway, I actually don't think it's final. I still think they are going to change the subtitle at some point, maybe when they are going to release this version on PC or something like that.
I don't know. Maybe because I think they won't, if only because Konosetsu ni Ayokoego is specifically the Amantis Amentis one, and it makes sense because love Amantis Amentis. It
Yeah,
does.
yeah,
So since they're still going with the Amantis Amentis name, I think they'll keep it.
yeah. Anyway, so that's basically the only thing we can talk about on this website. So the release date is still September 27th. It will still going to cost 5,800 yen, and it will still going to be digital only. So this is part of the reason why we think they are going to release it on PC, because just because you released a digital version doesn't mean people won't want to have it physical version of it.
Well, that and the fact that their primary market is a PC market, actually.
Yeah, yeah, but of course. So that's it for the website, and I suppose we can also discuss some other news which we haven't discussed before, because uh, they don't really concern us all that much, because they mostly take place in Japan, and we can only talk about what it means for us and for light in general. Well, uh, you most probably haven't heard about anything of this, so we are going to just give you the short gist of it. So, on July 1st, on the release day of the last episodes of anime, Light had a pretty strange promo campaign, which concerned pro wrestling and Harasawa Koki-san, which is the voice actor for Spinne. So they had a pretty strange idea because one of Light's producers wanted to try his hand at wrestling, and they had another wrestler, so-called Onryo, I believe, whose mannerisms are pretty similar to Spinne in a way. So they had an idea: why not have Harasawa-san dub his actions on the ring, so to say. And as you might know, if you have ever watched or listened to the Dies Irae radio, Harasawa-san is a pretty good. He improvises a lot, and he really loves doing it. So they thought it will be a good fit. And then they just put even more Dies Irae references on top of this match. They got a guillotine on the rings, and the winner had to affix his opponent's neck on it, and whoever does it is the winner. They also had Ayumi, who is not only one of Light's producers and personalities, but also a singer who actually cosplayed Rusalka on stage and performed Cadence, the anime opening. And well, it was apparently a pretty good show. Harasawa-san really outdid himself, and he also sprinkled some references to Rusalka because of course she is on the stage, so it's hard to ignore. And anyway, so Onryo emerged victorious and left us wondering just what the hell happened.
I mean, you're surprised, but I'm not exactly, like, I can see how they came to this idea. You can take anything, add Spinne to it, and it is immediately 500% improved.
Well, yeah,
so,
yeah, but
so you know...
why not take something originally good and make it even better?
Well, I don't know. That's a statement you're making there, that wrestling isn't originally good.
Well, I won't make any judgments. I haven't seen the match yet.
But yeah, everybody, I think everyone were kind of, you know, had question marks over their heads because...
Yeah, especially before everyone actually knew what's going on. We just heard, oh, they're going to have a pro wrestling crossover. Wait, what? Are we going to cosplay Machina or something, or just
Yes, gotta flash that Maki smile, but no, but you know, I guess that like being there would probably change your mind. I'm sure it was actually pretty fun.
Yeah.
But you know, like, why not?
Yeah, it's just that it makes me wonder: is this really the best way to promote Dies that they had? It's
you gotta aim it at pro wrestling audience. You gotta.
Yeah, I suppose. Hopefully, Maki will have some suplex moves in Pantheon.
Definitely, but you know, you gotta go for like that tiger mask.
Yes.
Influence. No, but I think it's is it necessary? Probably not, but you know, if it's it was just part of all that of all those events that happened at the beginning of July. That there was like a lot of these series events. It's just something on the side. Why not?
Yeah, it's just that some people are wondering, is this the best way to use the overall budget? But I actually don't think it all comes from the same place, so to say. So, for example, if they didn't have the wrestling, the anime wouldn't magically become better.
No, of course. If anything, there's a good chance that the wrestling itself kind of
yeah, actually,
fixed in.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Like, having a studio give its have voice actors pitch in.
Yeah, yeah,
Sounds like it's like it's a it's the publicity goes both ways, I
yeah,
suppose.
yeah. Anyway, so that's something that happened, and something that haven't didn't happen yet, but will happen soon, is the world premiere of the designer dress that is based on Mari's Pantheon design, which was originally revealed as the English version's cover illustration. Then we got it on the Pantheon website at the end of March of last year. Then we got it on the Pantheon website after it got updated, and then we got it in the anime itself. So there is clearly a lot of thought put into it. So uh, I can't really say it off the top of my head, but some Japanese designer who specializes in wedding dresses decided to just craft it in real life. And we are going to have the world premiere of it on August 11th, I believe, which will also feature Sakakibara Yui and Narita Ken-san, who will apparently perform the role of a priest.
I
Unspecified priest, I must say.
I wonder who's gonna be the groom though.
Yeah. Anyway,
Hopefully me. No.
so
Uh,
I
yeah.
can actually see why this dress would be made, because again, it's a good PR move, because Mari is really cute, her dress is really good, and actually cosplayers are a pretty large portion of the fan base.
Yes.
Not to mention that a lot of them are female.
Hmm.
So while I wouldn't believe that it will be used as a wedding dress first and foremost, I do think that it's a pretty nice move. It will be very nice to see it
Live.
live, yeah. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's only the first of the dresses we are going to see. And while I don't think Mifra's clothes are going to be as easy to craft,
Not in this century, at least.
yeah, yeah. Although I don't want to say that Mari's dress is easy to craft.
No.
But anyway, so I can see them going in this direction of making even more female apparel and female merchandise, so to say. Uh, Actually, I do believe that when the first episodes of the anime had their premiere, they actually asked the female fans who attended the premiere what they would like in the merchandise. And they basically said that it's pretty difficult to have all these keychains that have character portraits all over it, and they would like something a bit more subtle. And actually, this dress is a pretty good example of that, even if it's a bit on the expensive side. But yeah,
A bit on the expensive side.
yeah, yeah. But still, if you had no idea about this, you would still be able to appreciate it, and if you wore it, you would still show yourself as a member of the Fangs, so to say.
Yeah, I would definitely like to see like a cosplay recreation of the tapestry with Ren in the uniform and
Yeah,
Mari
yeah.
down in that in the dress. It would be, I think it would be lovely.
Yeah,
It's definitely a pretty dress. I do feel like I do kind of don't know if the underboob kind of suits how
yeah.
pure the dress is. It kind of
Well, I
clashes.
suppose it is inspired by her original white gown to some extent.
Perhaps no, like it makes sense that it would, but I don't know. It just feels like it kind of clashes with the.
Yeah, yeah, I suppose.
But whatever. The dress is beautiful. So
Yeah. Anyway, so all these events are kinda going to last us until the end of summer, where we are going to have the Switch version of Amantes Amentas, and after that, supposedly the Pantheon promo campaign will be in full swing, and maybe we will actually be able to play it before the end of the year.
yeah, actually, there's a point that the Japanese fangs have pointed out that Light have been tweeting that Pantheon has a release planned for 2018,
Yeah, and it's been
which
that way
is
ever since they have changed the release date from winter 2017 to 2018.
yes. So it's they still haven't said that it's going to be in 2019. So people are taking this as a chance to be to
Cautiously
be
optimistic, yeah.
cautiously optimistic. Yes. So
Well, I do
let's
believe that it's just Light not updating their template tweets that they post from time to time. As for example, the manga tweet that they post still has the cover of Volume 2, even though we already have Volume 3 with Kay and Ren fighting on it.
Mhm.
Well, anyway, all signs for now point that they are accelerating towards Pantheon because the anime is already over, and they still have to ride this uh, bandwagon of Dies and sell even more stuff while people care. Anyway, we will talk about it when it happens, but for now we will discuss the last 6 episodes of the anime, which came out actually not that long ago. They came out 2 weeks ago, and they are still fresh on our minds. In fact, I actually finished watching them yesterday, and that means we can discuss it in even greater detail. But first, I have to point out that we had to wait for these last 6 episodes for 6 months, and whether it was worth it or not is still up in there. So, what do you think? Did we really have to wait so long?
That's a good question. Well, it's obvious why it had to be cut because they ran out of time for the TV
Yeah, yeah.
slot.
Uh,
I guess that they wanted some time to polish up the episode, which the episodes are still there are still some parts that could have been better polished, but
yeah,
I do think that that on the overall the last 6 episodes were of a slightly higher quality
yeah,
compared
yeah.
to
Agreed.
the first 12.
Yeah,
I do think they aimed it like for this month with the intent of releasing it as part of a bombardment of announcements, so as to increase the hype. Because the anime ends, everyone's kind of
yeah.
emotional
I
about
can
it,
see that.
and
So basically, because they had other projects down in the pipeline, they figured they might as well use the last episodes of the anime to cross promote it all.
yep.
Yeah, okay. And mm, I do want to say that the simple fact that we did get 6 extra episodes is pretty nice. And really, there aren't that many examples in the anime history when we get not 12, not 24, but 18 episodes. And
Yes.
I don't really want to imagine what would have happened to the anime if we only had 12.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
we did get 18, and although it did cause some confusion because people kinda assumed that the anime ended after episode 11, And then when the last 6 episodes aired, a lot of people were just, I thought it was already over. Huh? Okay. So, uh, anyway, for all intents and purposes, there is like no breaks between the TV part and the online streaming part, besides maybe the recap episodes, a single recap episode which aired on TV after the first 11 and before the first 6 on July 1st. And actually, I do think that airing it in July was a better idea than airing it in December. But anyway, after the recap episode, we got to episode 12, which is called Degree of Emanation. It actually begins with another exposition scene of Mercurius and Reinhardt talking to each other and discussing the structure of the throne, of Ewigkeit in general, and what Reinhardt is supposed to do. Then we get to the scene of Ren and Trifa discussing Isaac's history, discussing what they are going to do from now on. We get Case Dream, which was actually in the visual novel, but in a slightly different way. Then it all comes together when Trifa, Kai, and Kay and Shiro fight in the park. Trifa, of course, emerges unscathed, and the episode ends with a short I'm not
A short
even
scene. A
yes, a
short
short scene
scene.
basically on the beach of Mercurius talking to Mari and then Ren talking to her as well. Yeah, so this was the very first episode which we saw after the long break, and it actually shows, I think. It's of pretty high quality.
Yeah, and just listening to your synopsis, there's a lot going on in that
Yeah,
episode.
and it all
Uh,
actually somehow fits in a
it
single
also
episode.
yes, it also fits in a single episode without feeling awfully rushed.
Although I do
So
have to say that because it wasn't airing on TV, they did have some
a
more
couple of
time to
a couple of
fit.
minutes more,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Remember that scene in episode 3, which they had to cut and add to the Blu-rays. And they didn't have to cut anything here. They just could use all the time they have. Anyway, so yeah, that's a lot of going on, and mm, uh, there isn't much they had to cut here, really.
And yet there were changes.
Yeah, there were some, but not in a bad way, I think.
That's arguable, and actually, it's interesting because episode 12 is probably one of the episodes I have the most to talk about.
Yeah, yeah, go for
Interestingly
it.
enough, we'll get there in a bit, but yes, yeah, episode 12.
Well, the first thing that caught everyone's attention is the exposition at the beginning, where we actually see one very dead morning star.
Yes, we see Satanael, and to be honest, Satanael looks kind of weird in that scene. He looks
Yeah, he looks pretty long, I have to say.
he looks pretty long, and looks like he's sleeping more than
Well,
dead. um, but yes, and you have, interestingly enough, Mercurius in kind of an odd kind of robe.
yeah,
The,
which feels a bit Egyptian to me, actually.
yeah, which makes sense because I forget the name of the character, but he was also like some kind of
Yeah, he was
Egyptian.
also Jehuti, I believe.
Yes, he was also that.
Who is basically Thoth or Hermes or Mercurius of Egypt.
Yes,
So yeah.
yeah. So he was one. So that was one of the many aliases he had taken over the millennia he lived. So I guess that's that.
Yeah.
But yes, that caught everyone's eyes because Satanael, wow. We actually see Satanael outside of Paradise Lost. That's
Yes, and he's still not voiced, unfortunately.
well, he's dead,
Yeah.
but yeah. Um Convenient enough timing to hide who's going to be his voice
Yep.
actor, assuming they've decided. Um But yes, there's that. The scene itself is actually fairly interesting in the sense that it apparently takes place in the 1940s.
Yeah.
You can see them in Berlin.
We
Uh,
did have a lot of episodes where Reinhard and Mercurius just talk to each other in some underground cavern where they hide after uh, mm,
I'm assuming
staging
after
up the
Reiner,
assassination.
yeah. Well, they didn't exactly stage it up.
Well, yeah, he was
He's
actually.
assassinated.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no, it's interesting. There were a few scenes in the VN where you can see them just like sitting there talking about for knowledge.
Yeah, actually, it does remind me that there was a very important scene in chapter 2, which the anime skipped, where they are just discussing for knowledge in general and
Yes, that's
what.
the scene I had in mind. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And this one is basically serves the same purpose, even if it's mostly about uh,
Emanation.
yeah, about emanation and what exactly Reinhardt has to do, and not why he has to do it.
Yes. After that, we have Kay's dream, which is,
Yeah,
as you said, it's a little different. In the visual novel, it's just her living a normal life
yeah, talking
with
to
like
her classmates.
it's, yes, and just being a Genki schoolgirl. Well, as Genki as Kay can be. And in the anime, they change it. That you can see her like hurrying to school, all generic anime style, and
Yep,
bullying her larger brother, who is now apparently married to Beatrice, who is surprisingly young
yep.
for an 84-year-old.
Oh,
Um,
that's a dream, so it's okay.
yep, yep, and yeah, and
Actually, I think it's the only talking part of Kai in the anime.
yes,
Yeah,
yes, it
it
is.
is.
But it's nice to see Kai. It's nice to see Beatrice. That scene is very heartbreaking because we all kind of want to see this
Yeah,
this
and we
large age gap
actually
couple
could
happy.
see it in the end, but we didn't.
Well, we don't know. They're probably out there.
Yeah, so it's just another nice bit of fan service.
Yes, but it's a good scene. And then there's the scene that follows after that.
Yeah,
Uh,
the action scene was actually pretty nice, I think. The entire sequence of Kain striking at Trifa and him just tanking it like a boss was pretty well animated, and a lot of people were like, "Wow, I can't believe it! The same anime which had this or that scene." But okay,
yes.
yeah. So they got pretty serious, and that's already a good reason to wait for 6 months. But
So,
overall, this scene hasn't changed that much since the visual novel.
mhm.
Although I do think it got a bit less Shiro in it.
Well, sure. That didn't have a lot to do in that particular
Well, yeah,
scene.
he just kind of pointed out, oh yeah, you know that yellow part of the transmutation of gold? Well, doesn't this remind you of anything, huh? Huh?
Yeah. So, that fight was okay, and then we have the scene following that, which is the talk on the beach, which they actually
Yeah,
added a bit of Mercurius into there, which is fine, and there's the talk on the beach, and that's actually something that I'm going to go into a bit,
yeah, go ahead.
because it's actually a pretty major change in general direction from the visual novel because, and it's actually a big kind of thematic setter for what the anime would end up doing in the end, which is again a pretty different direction compared to everything else. Basically, the big change is that in this scene, which in the visual novel is the scene where you have Ren and Mari hugging, holding each other, that very famous CG, which ended up also the beginning of the Amantis Amentis opening. It's basically a little different in the sense that the scene went from being very centered on Ren to being very centered on Mari.
Yeah.
Because in the anime, Mari talks about how if in a world of eternal recurrence, a ghost would be unnatural because ghosts don't stick around. Souls don't stick around. They reincarnate.
They don't reincarnate. They go back.
They don't reincarnate. They recur. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it makes no sense for her to exist. So she's very unnatural and very weird and something odd. And she's like a really weird existence. And she's probably causing Ren a lot of suffering, which is in the undertone, but Mari never goes into that in the visual novel itself.
Yeah, she does mention it here and there, but doesn't really go deep on it.
Yes. While the visual novel is very different in that Ren is the one talking about how unnatural he is. Because it's odd that he never cared about his roots, that he never cared about his existence, that the fact that he doesn't have parents never even bothered him, that look at him, he's basically doing everything so perfectly, his powers develop so fast, he's unnatural no matter how normal he wants to be. And then he says that, like, I'm a literal protagonist.
Yep.
How weird is that? How unnatural protagonists in stories are. And that all ties into the visual novel's metafiction angle.
Yes.
And how Mercurius is like the author of this opera, and all the characters are like bound into the karma he puts on them, and everyone's basically marionettes that he operates in a way, and Ren is his representative. And all of that kind of ties back to what we talked about 2 weeks ago, about how the anime completely kind of dropped the Zarathustra thing. And the Zarathustra thing is very significant because Zarathustra also connects to Nietzsche and the act of killing God. And, and the Ubermensch, his full name is supposed to be Zarathustra Ubermensch. So all of that gets completely swept under the rug in favor of Mari's development, which is not a move I exactly agree with. I think that if you want to develop Mari and her character and her conflict of being unnatural, that's great, but it shouldn't come at the price of Ren's. And I feel like if you take away the meta angle, Dies Irae loses a lot of its potency.
Yeah, and because all that remains is basically a huge battle royale, which is a pretty cliche story. So
cliche. It's not as thought provoking.
Yeah.
And that's a shame. It makes the story as the anime presents it significantly more inferior to the visual novel. And you can take this right now and quote me. And if anyone wants to assume that that the two of us are like big anime shills who are defending the anime and all that, no, we definitely have a lot of stuff to criticize about this anime. I think there is a lot, being big fans, we're very, very attentive to every little change that's made. And when a change this big is made, it does bother me a lot personally. It's like I think that Ren's attitude towards being a protagonist is part of what makes his character really interesting. It's part of what makes his desire to break free from that fate, to break free from his role, to reclaim who he used to be, much more interesting. Now, of course, all this isn't as relevant to the Mari route because
Yeah.
this is the in Rhea route, but it's still it still mentions it, and it does come later into play with some Machina bits that are I kind of wish they had gotten maybe a little deeper into Machina's relationship with Ren from the Lotus angle. Maybe have Ren call his name.
Well,
Um,
we will discuss it when we get to it, but
yeah.
I do think it's fine how they did it in the anime.
Well, okay, but I mean, I'm gonna like you're the big Machina buff here, so I'm not gonna argue with you on that angle.
Machina is
But
buff enough without me.
yes, but but yeah, it's a change that I'm not entirely comfortable with. It's a change that I feel really takes away from the
Yeah,
series.
and interestingly enough, I haven't seen the same complaint raised all that much
Which
across all the discussions I have read.
yes, and it's something that I don't know if it baffles me. Maybe I'm just weird that way.
Well,
But
I do agree that Ren is a much better protagonist than people assume. So I do agree that any scene which develops him more deeply deserves to be featured in the anime, and losing even one is pretty discouraging, so to say.
yes.
But that's basically where the episode ends. And overall, like I said, it was a pretty slightly better than average, even if they did make that questionable change at the end. But
It was well received, if nothing else.
yes, and it's a good sign towards the rest of the episodes, which we didn't actually had. We didn't have to wait that much to see them all, so we can go right ahead to episode number 13, which is aptly named Glasshammer, which begins with Rhea coming to her senses in the Obsidian Round Table chamber, having a small talk with Eleanor, who basically tells her to do whatever she wants because it's her last chance, basically. Then we get a rather traumatic Trifa flashback, which explains his origins. Then we get to the rooftop of the school where Kay confronts Trifa. Trifa assumes his newly obtained battle form, and a battle takes place between Kay and Trifa, and later between Trifa and Machina, and
That's about it.
yeah, and while Shiro and Ren try to come to their rescue, Schreiber stops them, and Machina does what
No,
he
no, no,
does best.
no. That's next episode.
Huh?
I think that's the next. Well, not exactly next episode, but I think this particular episode has them coming to the church because Trifa tricked them. They come to the church and they find it's abandoned. Right.
Yeah, I think it ends at the point where Machina delivers his Maki Punch, and he explains to Trifa that whoever you are hoping,
Expecting.
yeah, whoever you're
Yeah.
expecting won't make it in time. Yeah, and then we get the giant Glassheim skeleton emanating across the globe. This episode was a bit more questionable, I have to say, even if most of it was already in the trailers, like the most questionable parts of it.
Okay, so first point worth mentioning before we even go into the discussion of the events is the episode title.
Yes,
The episode title
I suppose.
is Glazaim, as you noted, but in Japanese it's Glazaim in Furigana,
Yes,
and it's actually Shugado Shikoten in
Shurado.
kanji. Yes, Shugado Shikoten.
Shurado.
Yeah, it's my pronunciation.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So that's actually the title of shall we say, Reinhardt's, not his throne, but of his law.
His world, so to say.
His world, his law, even though it never
They
emanated.
are one and the same anyway, so
Yes. Yes, and it basically, I guess you could translate it as the sublime path of carnage. So yeah, that's a point that's worth mentioning, because it's actually the Shugado Shikoten thing. Actually, it's kind of alluded to here and there in Dies, but it's only ever. I think the first time it completely got that title was actually in Kajiri Kamui Kagura.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, like Shurado itself is mentioned in Dies Irae, I believe.
Maybe I can't really remember.
I think it was, or
Yeah,
maybe
it's a pretty. It's a word in a vacuum.
yes.
It exists. It's just that it doesn't take on this separate meaning of Reinhardt's law until.
Until later on.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so into the episode. The scene with Eleanor has a few interesting nuances to it, because it takes a bit of reading into between the lines, I think, because this is actually the first time that Rhea is entirely confronted with the fact that not only is Lisa her great grandmother, she gets confirmation. Lisa is her great grandmother, because she still has room for escapism after Rusalka blabbering about it. But basically, Eleanor tells her, go say your goodbyes, because soon enough you'll have to do your roles. And the exact line of what she says is, you know who you have to ask if you want to know more about it. And it's significant, because at this point, the only person she has left, the only parental figure she has left, is Strifa.
Yeah.
So yeah,
she still has a few friends, but
she has friends, but they're not gonna help her there.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's definitely something that's worth mentioning.
And because Trifa soon dies and Lisa is no longer there, doesn't really have any decent reason to leave, and she goes down her destined role.
I suppose.
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't say she goes willingly, but
yeah, she still resists, of course, but it's pretty different from her own route, so to say.
Yeah. Now, the Trifa flashback was well done, I think. It was well done. It was chilling. If you ever needed to know why Trifa wanted to do all the stuff he did, all his sneaking around, all his backstabbing, all his conflicting motives and actions, that scene right there should be a good example of just how damaged and guilt-ridden of a person he is.
I do have to say that its use of dramatic timing is sublime. Like,
yes.
Every single second nothing happens on the screen, you just clutch your knuckles in anticipation.
It's suspenseful, and the voice acting is always good, even though Reinhardt is mostly talking in that scene. It's a good scene. It's a good adaptation of a scene that the visual novel actually failed to emphasize in any good way. We got no CG for that scene. We got no sprites for that scene.
Yeah.
And the anime actually, I feel like, for once, did this particular scene justice. Then we have Eleanor showing up, doing her stuff.
Yeah, before that we
threatening
got,
good old Triff. Actually, before we go into that, there's also the scene, like you said, with Kay basically demanding to know what he did to Kai and Beatrice, and this is actually the first the first reference we ever got in the anime to the events of 1995.
Yes.
The event of how Eleanor and Kai died.
Beatrice.
Eleanor and
Beatrice and Kai.
Beatrice and Kai died. Yes, pardon. Which, it's a shame that this part never got adapted.
Yeah, I actually did expect to get like a single episode dedicated to it, but
Yeah, so
we didn't get any.
and we got basically no reference to the Doppel Adler, which is a
Yes.
shame because the Doppel Adler are actually more significant than some fans might think.
Yeah, as I said, we only heard about them after the Mario route was done, so I
Oh,
suppose
yes.
it's not that important.
Yes, no, but I mean, since
But it would have been nice.
No, the thing is that they are actually pretty significant in the grand scheme of things. Like, we only hear of them in one side story within Diaz, but they actually have a role in the Self-Light novel. They definitely have a presence. They're definitely a force that have been acting against, kind of striking at the LDO in little overt ways.
Yeah, you could even say that they are the reason the LDO even suffered defeat in the end.
Yes, in that regard. Even though, well, that wasn't as much them as it was the misunderstanding of motives between Beatrice and Kai. But
And there was probably some Mercurius behind the scenes, so
there was definitely some Mercurius behind the scene, as always there is. But he had to cut Beatrice out for being a very annoying actress. No, never mind. Pardon me for my memes. But yeah, we got our first little peek at something that didn't make it in, sadly. But yes, it has basically Kay finally turning against Strifa, finally, trying to get revenge on him for basically ruining her life, which is something that has perhaps a little more to do with her own route, but, it's a little peak.
yeah.
And then
we got Trifa's battle form.
Yes, we got Trifa's battle form, which, it's a touchy subject.
I know that at least Japanese fans didn't like it that much.
Yes, I'm pretty sure most fans didn't like it that much because it's not like, if you wanted to add armor to like signify the divine vessel, I feel like it's something perhaps a little more, either a little more subtle or a little better drawn would have probably.
I don't know, probably just turning gold wouldn't have done it justice, I think.
Probably not, but I don't know, something that was either a little more subtle or a little better drawn would have probably left a stronger impression if you absolutely had to have, like, given...
Well, I do believe that it's a good move in the end, because in the visual novel it really isn't that easily understood just how...
Well, I think that's kind of the point, because Strifa...
Well, like, yeah, he's a subtle person.
He's subtle and he's unassuming. You wouldn't assume that he's as... I don't know if even strong, but if he's as indestructible
as... He's just very tough.
Yes, as indestructible as he is.
And it's also worth mentioning that you can actually figure out that his body belongs to Reinhardt just because they are of above the same height, they have the same hair color, they have even the same hair length, I believe. But
yes,
just because they this body has a different soul inside of it, it makes a completely different impression.
It makes a completely different impression, but just for the sake of it, I have a friend, and I showed her like one of the Dies Irae fan books, and she like saw Trifa and she saw Reinhardt, and they're the same person, aren't they? So it's like, a person who doesn't actually know much about Dies Irae. She does know that Reinhardt is Reinhardt.
Okay.
Because she's a girl, so her eyes are immediately drawn to the guys. But she
If
like
only it was only girls.
but yes, some fans would kill you for saying that. But she immediately surmised it, so it's actually not at all it's not all that surprising. But like you said, they have an entirely different impression as a character. So
Yeah. I actually don't remember my first impression of them, which I saw the CGs in like 2008, but it might have been something similar. Like I can assume they're the same person, but something is still pretty different between them.
something's going on there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Also, another point worth bringing here is that pension is going to happen, and assumingly it will have some sort of character progression, because if nothing else we have at least 4 different characters taking forms that we haven't seen in the anime or in the visual novel. We have Rusalka in her witch clothes, we have Eleanor and Schreiber in their cool cloaks, and we have Wilhelm in his shibari wines.
yeah.
Yeah, so just having an extra form would have happened either way, because we have to have Trifa in Dies Irae Pantheon, and we
Yeah.
might as well show it here. So
Yeah, there's a good chance that we'll have both Valeria Triffa as the divine vessel and Valerian Triffa as in his original form.
Yeah, because they do have different powers.
Yeah, and we do know that civilian characters will appear. We know Kasumi is set to appear. We know Rei is set to appear. So there's no reason if they can appear.
Someone has to be Tsukuna.
Yes, but yes, we have civilian characters who are set to appear. So there's no reason why Valerian Triffa might not make it in.
Yeah. So, and we also have like 4 different kinds. So we might as well have 2 different Trifas.
Why not?
Yeah. So anyway, I'm not a fan of it either, but I can see why they did what they did with this form. After this short struggle, so to say, which was I don't think it was as well animated as the previous episode, but it was fine. Then we get Eleanor entering the scene, and Machina entering the scene soon after. We get Machina's Bria and a short version of his aria. And that's basically where the episode ends. Yeah, I have to say that I'm still a huge fan of Machina just breaking through space-time to appear whenever he wants. And I hope this teleportation move will be of some use in Pantheon. But anyways, so someone did point out that his punches literally punch off the armor of Trifa, and I guess that is a good visual representation of his powers being able to negate the perfect defense of the divine vessel. But
it's worth noting that his punches do that even before he uses Bria.
Yes, actually. But I don't think it was actually required. So if we had just Trifa simply flinching from his attacks, it would have been enough, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we get a short version of Machina's Bria, which is a shame, but what can you do? Some people didn't get it at all, so I should consider myself lucky, I guess. Yes, and we get a short glance at Schreiber, and that's basically it.
Yep.
Oh yeah, and we got the iconic speech of Trifa's, which
yes, of course, is very iconic quote, which actually appears in a very odd fashion, in a very somewhat altered fashion in Kajiri Kamui
Yes.
Kagura.
Which
Not
which
everyone
does
caught it.
make it one of my favorite quotes, actually.
Yes, it does. It's a very strong quote. It's a very iconic quote. It's actually the quote of his you hear in the bar scene, because in the bar scene, every character in the bar scene you have like an echoing of the quote of a quote they had from before reincarnating,
Yes.
and that's actually the quote they picked for Trifa. Um, but yes, actually about the Kajiri Cowboy Kagura scene, some fans, myself included, actually I didn't hear it well in the first time because there's a lot of distortion on it, so
Yes.
I didn't pick it up. But after listening to it again, yeah, that's it.
I didn't actually even recognize him as himself at first. I
Yeah,
assumed
yeah,
it
same.
was like Sakuya or something. And then
Yeah,
I went back, read that scene again, and it struck me like a ton of bricks.
yep, yep,
Golden bricks.
yep. Uh, yes.
Uh, yeah, so this is still a very strong scene, even if it's. I actually think it was better in the trailer than in the final version of the episode. But Naruto Ken's voice still delivers it.
Magic.
Yes. uh, so that was a fine way of bidding farewell for everyone's favorite priest. And anything else to say here before we move on?
Mm, well, there was that little point that the anime never quite points out, but there is like a rock paper scissors relationship between the generals that Eleanor kind of mentions it, that she can say that that she does want to. You'll probably be able to take my if I have to shoot my cannon, you'll probably be able to take it.
Yeah, and he
Uh,
actually did, I believe.
yes, so it's like a little relationship thing between the three generals that because Eleanor's attack can't miss, and Schreiber has paper thin defenses. Eleanor always beats Schreiber, and since Schreiber can always dodge, Schreiber beats Machina because he basically can keep dodging until Machina runs out of power to operate his Bria. And Machina, since he can withstand Eleanor's hits, he can basically just rush her head, kill her with one fist.
Yes.
All Saitama style. So, yeah, it's kind of a rock, paper, scissors relationship between the three generals that kind of, sort of gets mentioned here in a roundabout fashion. And that's
Yeah,
about it.
and it might be the overall system behind Pantheon. Like
Yep,
you
it might.
have our first
Yeah, like
triangle of
speed.
elements.
Yes, like speed types, armor types,
Yeah, or
attack types.
like fire, water, wind, like in most
Something,
mobile
yeah,
games.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, anyway, I suppose we can move on to episode number 14, which is called Transmutation of Gold. It begins with the ending of the last episode of
Trifa
Machina.
dying.
Yes, of Machina delivering his punch to Trifa. Trifa's soul separating from the Divine Vessel. The Divine Vessel launching into space, I guess. The entire city's souls being devoured by Reinhardt. Then, after a short mm, momentary of reprieve, we get to a scene in school where Ren comes to his senses and realizes that the city has basically gone extinct, and he, Shiro, Kei, and Mari mm, put their thoughts together and figure out what to do from now on. Then we have the iconic scene of Reinhardt asking his generals what is victory to them. They discuss it at some length, and go on to war. Uh, Not before Rhea talks to Reinhardt and explains to him how pitiful he is actually. And then we get a short scene on the rooftop of the Suahara Tower, where everyone is basically struggling to defeat Reinhardt. Everyone lies down
Fails.
and then go get up and go ahead and try to beat him again, which it's pretty strange scene anyway. So uh, uh, this is a this episode is basically a midpoint between the main body of the story, so to say, and the final battle. So it's actually a pretty short chapter in the visual novel, so
Yes.
it's okay to have it last less than an episode. So what strikes me as important here is alright, so we can talk about this strange Vitruvian man scene, even if I don't know what to say about it.
The what? The what?
The Vitruvian man.
Oh.
Where Reinhardt launches into space.
Yeah. Well, basically, I feel like maybe it took a bit of reading between the lines, but basically, the reason Reinhardt can, in general, get resurrected is because his body is being operated by Triffa. Triffa basically carries his body. That's why he's the only vessel. So with Triffa out of the picture, Reinhardt can occupy his body again. We actually see it in K-Root as well.
Yes.
Now the whole thing with the body,
Yes.
I'm not sure why they picked that particular imagery for it, though.
Me neither.
Though I think that might have to do with Mercurius, actually, because maybe that's some kind of...
Well, yeah, this entire transmutation of gold, which is actually the title of the episode, is basically the alchemical process of creating gold and the Philosopher's Stone.
Yeah, so that might have well been just some Pericles' reference there, maybe using kind of Pericles', which is one of Mercurius's personas in the past.
Yes.
So maybe it's a reference to that, to the alchemy thing, to the alchemy aspect.
Yeah, although I'm not sure why it has Yggdrasil, I assume, on the background. And I think that having all 5 colors might have been a bit more related to this entire idea.
Yeah, and speaking of, and this is something we should discuss, and we kind of forgot to mention.
Yes.
These episodes actually had the ending.
Yes.
Yeah, the ending clip. So I think we can leave that for the end of this episode before we go into that. But
yeah, sure.
Since we don't want to, cut the discussion in the middle like that. But yeah, but you reminded me of the tree, so that you know, which relates to the ending. Okay, so once again, that scene was a little. People were a little baffled by it, but I don't know. I think it's okay in the overall scale of things.
There are sillier things happening in this episode.
Yes. Now, then we see the entirety of Suara's civilians getting desold, which it didn't look as good as it could have, but it was good to see it because it's implied that's what happened in the visual novel, but being able to see it as it happens, it's good. And then we have the scene in the school. Now, the scene in the school actually had some stuff I liked that they got from the visual novel, like Ren and Kay flirting, which is it's a point because Ren and Kay actually have the strongest chemistry out of all the heroines.
Yes, and
Uh,
luckily we did have some in the anime, even if it's not her route.
yeah, so it's nice that they brought this in, and there's also the part with them having a little. Of course, there's Mari being very very jealous, which is that's adorable. Like
It's not
that's
called
great.
the Day of Wrath for nothing.
Yes, and I can imagine Sakakibara Yui really channeling that Mari rage because
Yeah,
you
she
always
did mention something like that, like she did try to up the cute factor of Mari in this episode.
yes because I
And it
also
shows.
yes, and I also remember in the Pantheon stream when Masada explained that basically Kasumi being like the son for Ren means that she's like being this important to him means that she receives his protection as a god, and that's why she can fight. And Sakibara Yui was like, as Mari, I find this a little annoying. But yes, so yeah, that's the angry goddess, the day of Wrath indeed, angry day.
Angry
Uh,
day.
yes, angry day. Um, yeah, that was very nice. But them basically sitting down,
And it,
eating
yeah, yeah, yeah.
eating gross sandwiches, which I think the anime actually ended up kind of skipping out on how gross Ray's sandwiches are. But
Well, it's kimchi and umeboshi. Could it
yes,
not be gross?
yes, but basically they have that and have a little Prosit of milk,
Yes.
and and they make the oath to meet again and have
Yes.
another one of
And it
those.
sets up a scene in episode 17 where Mari and Mercurius talk to each other
Yeah.
to some
Uh,
extent.
yes, because it's actually a very setting moment for Mari's craving, as it would turn out.
Yes.
Then we have the what is victory scene. The what is victory scene is, I think, for the generals. I think that scene was actually done fairly well. The
Yeah,
general,
even if it's shorter than in the original, everything
well,
what had to
yes,
be done
that had,
is done well.
yeah, what had to be said was said. And that scene was always very striking to me and it was actually timed perfectly because, them leaving and Rhea being like, wait, and then Reinhard basically coming back suddenly, and
Yes.
it's like
Teleporting behind her.
yes, with a katana. No, but I think it's like a very, to me it was like, because at that point we've seen like the most we've seen of Reinhardt up to that point was it was K-Root, and in K-Root he wasn't like in K-Root he was the villain, but in here you see him just showing up and he talks to her like an equal, and
Yeah.
it's a very for me that was like something that impressed me a lot about Reinhardt, and is really a lot of what makes Reinhardt such a unique villain in a lot of ways, because
Yeah.
he's not because even if he is the confident, like confident, powerful Aryan intimidating presence that he is,
Yes.
and even though he is confident that he will win, he treats his opponents as equals, and it's
Yeah,
he's
it's
not
one
that.
thing to hear him saying "I love all and everything," but when you see him act that way, it really shows you that he really means it.
Yes, but on the flip side, and this is something that Rhea highlights in this particular part,
Yes.
which is this part is basically her asking, "Are you Isaac's father?" And he says, "I don't know who Isaac's father is. I don't care who Isaac's father is."
I still love
Uh,
him either way.
but she basically tells him that the flip side of loving everything loving everything equally means that you love nothing in particular. You love no one in particular. Everyone is the same to you, and
Well,
that
besides Mercurius.
yes, but it means that you're alone. No matter how much, how many people you gather, you're alone. and that's something that's going to come into play a little later on.
Yes.
But that was a very striking scene, regardless, and it was done fairly well. Now, about the ending scene with them fighting and kind of failing, I mean, it was badly directed. It was kind of messy.
Yeah, pretty much.
It was messy, but it makes sense. Basically, they're all trying to, and I don't know, I think they do say it, but maybe it's not quite as pointed out as it should be, but they're basically trying to beat him before he completely resurrects. Because basically, him going into Trifa's body when he's dying is like an emergency kind of response. The divine vessel is cracked, and now, and basically Reinhard descends into it to make sure that the gold transmutation.
He basically retrieves it.
He retrieves it so that the gold transmutation doesn't, go into risk. On the off chance that something does actually somehow manage to destroy his body, because he needs this body. That's what he's going to inhabit when he comes back. So basically, he's in an incomplete form, and he's incomplete form, and he's outside.
Has like 5 swastikas open.
Yes. No, wait. I thought it's 7.
Maybe.
It's 7 at that point, I think. At that point, it's 7 swastikas, but regardless, it's still incomplete.
Yeah.
And that's the point where there still might be and on top of that, not only is he incomplete, he's not in Glasheim, which is a difference from Kaerut. In Kaerut, he's in Glasheim. They're in his home turf, which is why it's even harder to beat him there. But here, he's still, he's in the physical world, not in Glasheim. Glasheim hasn't emanated yet. So, it's kind of, it's a chance to beat him. And they're basically trying, and they can't physically damage him. And, and we have, as we know, Rhea and Isaac kind of merging together.
Yeah, that was a pretty good scene, actually. Because in the visual novel, we don't see Isaac himself until the Rhea route.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose it's because the Mari route was written before Kay and Rhea's routes, so they also didn't have to draw his CGs and so on. And here we actually okay, so in the visual novel it's basically just a huge CG of swastika. But here we see Isaac as part of this world, so to say. And I suppose swastika itself is a pretty confusing topic to discuss, because I have seen a few people scratching their heads like, okay, so Isaac is a Sonnenkind and Rhea is a Sonnenkind, and they have 2 swastikas, and for some reason they need 2, and it's still an unenerby, even if it's not a physical object, so it can get a bit confusing, but I suppose when you just...
I think the anime actually explains it just fine in episode 12.
I suppose. And seeing it in this form, like, it's not just a symbol of swastika, it's like this particular sub-space of Glasheim, so to say, which is his unenerby.
Yeah, it's in a manner of speaking, you can say that in a way, by creating the 2 things, like mirroring what happens in Glasheim, it creates like a wedge to the real world for Glasheim to connect to, because Glasheim is usually in another dimension.
Yes.
So basically, it allows, by creating the swastika and gathering all these souls, which will also help Reinhard emanate, but it also, creates like an anchor for Glasheim to descend. So that was basically the idea, and the reason why there are 2 Sonnenkinds is explained. There's more than 2 Sonnenkinds, but why there are 2 Sonnenkinds is explained by Trifa in episode 12. So if anyone didn't get it, you should just watch episode 12 again and pay a little more attention, I suppose.
Hopefully. it will be enough. Anyway, so like I said, this episode didn't feel all that heavy on content. It did give us some key scenes, but it's overall a bit low tone, so to say.
Yeah, it's kind of a calm before the storm, shall we say?
Yeah, basically. And in that regard, it does its job pretty well. Like it says a lot when the action is the worst part of it, because it's not actually the main focus of the episode. So that's not too bad to have. And then we get to episode 15, which is called Weltall Emanation. And it's basically the first half of the three separate fights between Ren's team and the generals. First we have Kay basically burning to cinders in Eleanor's blast, and then re-emerging out of it with the Weltall Longinus, which Eleanor actually gave to her in episode 13, and actually starting to fight her and turning into new Tubalcain. We have Shiro starting his fight with Schreiber, which I'm not exactly sure at which point it ends here, but it's more of a one-way struggle, let's say.
Yeah.
And then we have Ren himself trying to fight Reinhardt using his Bria, but unfortunately it's still not enough, so Reinhardt just calls down Machina, and they proceed to fight between the two of them. And basically this episode doesn't really have a pronounced ending, because it stops in the middle of things.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's pretty difficult to discuss it separately from episode 16, but we can try, I guess.
Yeah.
So we have three separate fights happening at the same time, but since we can't see them all at the same time, naturally they have to switch perspectives a bit. So episode 15 is mostly dedicated to Kay's fight and Shiro's fight, and Ren and Machina only come down in episode 16 mostly. Kay's fight is pretty good, I think. It's mostly it's not even a fight, so to say. It's
very one-sided, yes.
Yes, and it's a very Dies fight, so to say, because people talk more than they actually fight.
Yes, because this fight is very much a clash of, I wouldn't even say ideologies, but a clash of characters pointing out each other's flaws.
Yes, basically.
Yep.
So, despite the fact that Kay actually took over Weltall Longinus and all the soul that belonged to it, she's still no match for Eleanor. She can try to talk her down, like, you're the most beautiful woman I have ever seen, and so on.
Yes.
And it's actually a small reference to her own route, where we had Beatrice's fight with Eleanor, where she explains just how pitiful.
And you know something? The funny part is that she gets the same talking down from someone else in Kajiri Kamui Kagura.
Yes, actually.
Which is really cool. It's a nice mirroring, and it's true for like most of these characters in Kajiri Kamui Kagura. A lot of them get kind of get their own logic thrown back at them, which is, very fitting.
Yes.
But, yeah, that fight is interesting. I don't know if you can say it with 100% that it's one-sided, because Kay was trying to get hurt.
Yes, I suppose.
No, she was trying to get hurt, because I don't know if she says it in the anime, but she does say it in the visual novel. She was trying to let Eleanor chip away at her, because the more she physically dies, the more she becomes Tubalcain, who is, resistant to pain, resistant to getting bits blown off of him. He's a far more tanky, bulky kind of creature. So, in her becoming Tubalcain is actually, however suicidal it is, for the sake of defeating Eleanor, it's actually working in her favor.
Yeah, it probably wasn't mentioned in the anime, so it's good to point it out here.
Yes, so she probably, I don't know, maybe if she was trying to be a bit more offensive, maybe she would have been, she would have been able to do it. But it's an interesting fight, mostly because it really, even the anime could have managed to get across the ideological kind of differences, like Eleanor basically telling her that in her eyes, Kay is an affront to everything Beatrice was.
Yeah.
She is a yellow, Asian, black-haired monkey, and she's a foolish girl who is full of naiveties and stupid dreams, who doesn't understand what true glory is, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah.
It's interesting, and it's in many ways also kind of mirrors. It also has Beatrice talking through Kay, which good luck telling when it's Beatrice and when it's Kay, because it's the same voice actress. But
well, I think they are different enough.
Yeah, no, she does do their voices differently, but it always amuses me because it's.
I mean,
it's
Kawashi Marino.
Yes, it's
so
she
has to know how to voice characters differently.
Yes, she does. Mostly because she tends to voice multiple characters per game so often, so very often. But it's definitely it was a good fight. It was I've seen people like live tweeting as they watch it, and they were like, "Okay, you show her." I guess it did its job well enough. And then there's
we got some Panzer. We got a landmine, which amused me greatly. Like all these small things that Eleanor actually has a lot of tools at her disposal, and not just random flames.
Yes, and it's actually more, like, I don't know if it's a little more, but something that we see more in her fight with Beatrice in Kay's route.
Yeah.
But it's cool. It's cool. I like it. Then there's
the end of it doesn't come until next episode, so we'll discuss it later. And we get Schreiber's fight with Shiro, which not much actually happens here. We get Schreiber explaining his origins, which I actually think could have been done better.
Doesn't that happen? It gets completed next episode.
Yeah.
Well, see, this episode, and this is I'm gonna kind of slide also to next episode with this. This battle was there was a lot of good stuff they cut out of it, and it annoyed me. It had a lot of good Shiro moments, mostly because, and it's something that they actually could have put in, and it annoyed me that they didn't, because in episode 13, basically they have to split up after they find that the church is ruined, and they have to flip a coin as to who rides the bike, and Shiro basically tells him, "You take the bike, because when three people ride with me, it always ends up in an accident." Now, this is actually a use foreshadowing, because what are you talking about? There's only two of us. It's foreshadowing, because Ellie is with him. And it's something that actually comes into play because there's actually a part where Ellie and Shiro get on Schreiber's bike, and the bike flips over. And
Yeah.
Shiro basically says, I told you bad stuff happens when free people ride on a bike.
Yes.
So no, there's like, the buildup of these little jokes is like, they also messed it up like earlier in the anime when they removed the whole things with Kasumi's beauty spot on her breast, which is how he recognizes the corpse when Spine kidnaps her, and that's something Shiro said. And it's actually a really funny dialogue because in the middle of all this action, you have Ren going up and saying, "Hey, what do you think about girls with big boobs?" And it's
is like, Nani?
Yes. It's like, these are like really good, memorable, strong, funny character moments that got cut off, and it's a shame. And we even lost one of Shiro's like biggest quotes about like, damn, your ass is so soft.
Yes.
It's a mimetic line. It's one of Shiro's most famous lines, and they cut it out, and it's such a shame.
Oh,
It's a shame.
mostly famous because it was used with Ren.
Yeah,
in
later
some
on.
trailer. Yeah.
Not in a trailer. It was in the Y Day video. We actually subtitled that. We did subtitle that. Shameless plug. Go to our channel. It's there if you want to see it. But it's not only because of that. The line itself is hilarious and people love it. And it got cut out, which is a shame. It's a shame. The battle itself is, pretty rushed, and it's a shame. And it's like,
Well, it is Schreiber we're talking about here.
It is Schreiber, but a lot of stuff kind of got cut out, like Shiro and Ellie being a union of man and woman versus Schreiber, who is
neither a man nor a woman.
Yeah, so like that kind of like opposition clashing against each other. It did show some parts well, like Schreiber going crazy over them trashing his bike and ruining his gun.
Yeah, we also had his giant skeleton shrinking and forming his bike, which came pretty close to all the explanations in the visual novel. Like, see this bike? It's a lethal weapon. It's a rabid beast which wasn't made for just fun rides and games. It was made for war, and it has a single eye like its owner and so on. Like, it came pretty close to doing the same.
That's actually a good touch that they put in. And I guess it kind of makes sense since we did see that Eleanor's railway gun was also integrated into her skeleton.
Yes.
That's nice. But yeah, there were little bits. Like, I mean, obviously you can't adapt everything that's in the descriptions, that's in the narration.
Yeah.
But still, it's a shame.
It can be said that this scene was mostly dedicated to Schreiber because there was little to no other way to explore his character, while Shiro did get a bit more time under the spotlight. So they kind of had to focus on Schreiber, on his mad ramblings, even if they felt a bit too forced to me, actually. But I suppose showing all this stuff instead of telling wasn't an option, really.
Yeah.
Well, they did show some stuff.
Well, it should be noted that the part in episode 17 with him, like, enacting all the stuff that's been done to him is actually spot on for the VM. He does do that.
Yeah. And it's supposed to make you feel like, oh, really? I don't think he's that boring.
Yeah, and it's something that I'm not sure. It's something that another part that the anime kind of kind of skimmed on that they could have put into more. Like I think they do kind of mention it in like a line or something, but it's like Ellie does basically say like you're like you're what's it called? You're a study book case
Yeah, yeah.
of a sociopath, like abused child, sexually abused, beaten over the head, verbally abused. Like I'm sorry to say for your sub story, but kids like you are almost a dime a dozen in a way. Like
Yes.
it's not you're not. I'm sorry, kid. You're not special. When his entire big speech earlier was, I'm neither a man nor a woman. I don't need to reproduce. And you know why? Because I'm perfect. I'm special. Everyone else dies, but I'm immortal. And she basically comes and completely picks apart, just takes all the screws out of that, out of that, out of that statement. And it's a strong scene because it basically does say, no, there's nothing sympathizable about this character. Don't take this as us trying to say that, oh yeah, but he's actually, you should feel sorry for him because he's just misunderstood. No, he's not misunderstood. He's a sociopath.
Yes.
And it's a good point, and it's something that I know a lot of the people that don't like the visual novel would on a surface level would assume that this is what they would do with the villains, go around and say that yes, they're actually misunderstood and human, and maybe the Nazis aren't actually guilty. And no, not at all.
Not
That's
at all.
not at all what they're saying. They're saying no, they're sociopaths, they're evil, there's no, even if they are human, even if what happens to them is something that could happen in real life, even they're still sociopaths. They're still unforgivable. They're still, they're not special. They're not cool. And this is a lot of what's going on there because, and maybe it's a little better felt with the visual novel and its, and its theme of letting go of illusions.
Yeah.
But, in the end, what a lot of these battles do is they kind of remove the veil of glorious Hyneriar, glorious
Uncarried.
warrior, glorious warrior, that will live on forever, cool Nazi, haha. It kind of sheds that away, and you can see it both in Schreiber and in Eleanor, where they basically go around and tell Eleanor that, no, you're not everything you're saying you are, you're a foolish woman. You're a foolish woman that made a lot of mistakes, and you're every bit as in love as the rest of us,
Yes.
if not more. So it's like it picks them apart. It picks apart these. It's interesting because up until now they've been set up as these huge, superhuman
Yeah,
threats.
more than human, really.
Yeah, superhuman
They're basically half gods at this point.
at this point. Yeah, and it goes around and says, yeah, it picks them apart. It picks them apart. It picks apart their evil, and the results are. Even if you could claim that yes, they're certainly relatable, and they're certainly
To
kind
some
of
extent, yeah.
to some extent sympathetic. They're also, awfully flawed, awfully mistaken, and in Schreiber's case, completely and utterly beyond reproach. You can't excuse what this kid did. You can't. He's a sociopath. And so yeah, that's actually something that the anime should have done a little better because and maybe in doing that, people would have felt like Schreiber's character is a little more clear and a little more rounded out.
Yeah, actually, I did see a few opinions thinking that Schreiber doesn't really have a point in his story, the overall story structure wouldn't needed him that much actually, but by making him the example of all the awful things that could have happened in Germany and in the Third Reich and so on, it While it wouldn't have made him more sympathetic, it could have made him into more of an key figure, so to say, of the story.
Perhaps, yes.
Yeah.
And yes, and then we have Ren achieving Bria.
Yeah,
Which,
actually.
Which, super speed stuff.
Yeah, it was not that well animated, I think. Like, his run did feel a bit wonky at times.
It's not so much that it felt wonky, so much that, how long are these stairs?
Yeah. Well, the stairs only come in the next episode, but yeah.
No, how long is the roadies running on?
Yeah.
Okay, it was, interesting, and we do see later on, that he did actually manage to injure Reinhard, which is,
Yeah. And I do have to say that we assumed that he only reached Bria while fighting Reinhard, but no, he actually reached Absolute later on, so it's all fine.
Yes, it's just that the trailer was badly structured. It made it seem like he's reaching Absolute. But yeah, not much to say more about episode 16. We're gonna have to move to episode 17, but before we do, this is something we forgot from last episode. We need to discuss the ending.
Yeah, sure.
Now the ending, we actually caught a glimpse of it at some point during the airing. Like, not even a glimpse, we got some screenshots.
We got it from the first volume of the Blu-rays, I believe.
Yes, and oddly enough, it wasn't on the second one, which is puzzling. I don't know how it happened. But, we basically have, images of, like portraits of the different characters. But what we actually didn't know until we saw it ourselves is that all of these characters end up forming spheres in a tree.
Yes.
Now, my first thought was that this is, of course, the Sephiroth, until I counted and saw there are only 9 nodes.
Yeah.
Which is, Now, the other option is, of course, Yggdrasil. Which
especially
possible.
Since it does have a dragon near its roots.
Yes. Yggdrasil, well, Dies Irae draws from a lot of Norse imagery. That's definitely, a possibility. But, I did like it a little better when I saw Audi, like the image of everyone in the end with Mercurius and Mari and the tree. It ended up connecting because it felt like a little more than just a slideshow.
Yeah. I actually thought before we got the ending proper that we would have just a single sliding image over the entire ending, and I wouldn't have minded it if it was
Durara style?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. And what we got in the end is pretty close to what I had in mind.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's fine.
Yeah.
It's budget, but it's not badly done. It's not badly done budget. I feel
it has some Spinne faces.
Yes, it does. Spinne being the spectacular bastard that he is. Yes. Spinne.
Yeah. All right. So, is that all you wanted to say about the ending?
That's about all. I just felt like we should.
Yeah. Agreed. So, we go on to episode 16, where we have...
16, yeah.
Yeah, 16. Where we have the endings of all the 3 fights that we mentioned. We have Kay wounding Eleanor, her summoning her railway gun, and Kay throwing the Wewelsburg Longinus, which peels off and shows Truth Valkyria under it, and it pierces Eleanor's neck. We have Schreiber going into a fit, and Shiro and Ellie shooting him, after which he grows his hair and basically explodes. And we have most of Ren's fight against Machina, which not only shows their particular interaction and the interaction of their beliefs, but also a short throwback to Machina's drama CD, which is Todestak Verloren, which covers the way he came into being, basically. And after that we have Ren decapitating him, and finally him and Reinhardt reaching Absolute, and us getting the iconic scene, allow me
The iconic quote, yes.
Yes, basically. So, let's start from the beginning. So we have the ending of the Eleanor fight, which again was done pretty well. It's just that I'm not sure it's easily understood what happened here. Oh yeah, at the end of episode 15 we also get our first glimpse of Mari's god form, which
Yes.
basically brings us to this episode. So, Mari achieves godhood for the first time, and basically all three fights are won thanks to her. It's just that it's pretty difficult to understand the exact workings behind it.
Yes.
So, from what I understand, all three commanders get their powers from Reinhardt directly. And because they come from his law, from his world, if they appear in some other world, they lose most of their powers. So, for example, in Shiro's fight against Schreiber, we get a short glimpse of the beach and of the twilight, which basically stops time for them and allows them to catch up to Schreiber. And in Eleanor fight, we have her actually becoming vulnerable, as you might remember from episode 10. Mari did cut off her head by touching her, as she does, and in this scene her wound re-emerges, and Beatrice's sword strikes at that exact spot where she is already vulnerable. And in Ren's case it's a bit more complicated because he has his own rules, so we'll get to that later.
It's not so much that he has his own rule, it's also that Mari is bound to him as well.
Well, yeah, I suppose.
Yes. So, this is something that maybe the anime kind of. This is kind of where the anime being frugal with details, comes back to bite it. Because it doesn't exactly explain the relationship between Beatrice and Tubalcain.
Well, it's not supposed to be that well known until like K-Root, I believe.
Yes, and since K-Root isn't a thing here, it's not explained at all.
Yeah.
But, Eleanor does says it, my dear Valkyrie, there you are. Basically that Tubalcain isn't Tubalcain the Third, but Tubalcain the Fourth. With, Beatrice ending up being its latest host,
Yes.
shall we say. So yeah, her relic and her soul are actually trapped in the lance. And, Kay wielding it allows her to basically channel some of Beatrice, and gain some of her powers as well. And in the end, the True Valkyrie does come out and ends up decapitating Eleanor. Well, not decapitating, cutting it, and Eleanor chooses to die respectfully,
Yes.
um, as opposed to being defeated by a whelp.
I suppose.
You know that was the scene was okay. It was an okay adaptation
Yeah.
of the same Scene Division novel. I liked it.
I do think that
Uh,
Eleanor got the best outcome of the three generals in the anime. Like,
Sort of,
she's the
yeah.
most well developed, I think.
I'd actually claim the opposite. I'd claim that she's actually the least developed in the sense that she's the one that like her beliefs are the least shaken, and
Oh,
that's
yeah.
and that's and that's why she gets so much development in the sequel.
Yes.
But no, she does get go respectfully while Schreiber is crying and sniveling on the floor when poor Maki got his head cut off. Um,
Ah.
but yes, that fight was good. Schreiber's fight, people were a little taken aback by that scene of them suddenly
Yeah,
hovering
well, that's
in
actually pretty
a,
close to visual novel, so what can you do?
yeah, with them hovering in a flowery space. Um, but yes, that's pretty cool. That was pretty nice in the end, even though it was a little wonky. But they did end up catching up to Schreiber, even though, like I said, some stuff that should have been there got cut.
Oh yeah, I kind of forgot to mention, but I also liked how Schreiber Zarya got treated. Like his
Yeah. Oh yeah,
words
yeah, yeah.
are literally wheel tracks of his bike.
Yeah, but because and that's very significant because one of Schreiber's biggest descriptors, biggest lines is that you can only see everyone else as the tracks he leaves behind as he rushes onwards. So yeah, there's that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then
So
it ended up being
despite Schreiber being entirely unlikable, he can still be cool in ways like this.
that does sum up how I feel about Schreiber. I hate the kid, but you can't ignore how
Yeah.
cool.
Well, I usually described him as a living train wreck, so to say,
Yes.
or a
Uh,
bike wreck.
yes, a bike wreck is fitting. But like I said, even though that scene lost a lot of good bits,
Yeah, it was fine.
it was okay. And then we have Maki, and boy, Maki's scenes were.
Oh, yeah. In episode 15, his fight was. The bits of his fight were pretty okay, but episode 16 kinda got a lot of weird shots of him. We get a lot of pretty strange animation. We get Ren also doing some wonky stuff with his guillotines. And we
Yeah.
also get a flashback of Machina, which I'm not really sure I completely understand to this
Yeah,
point.
I understand the reasoning behind that scene because basically it has an adaptation sort of like you said of Machina's drama, which shows basically the drama itself shows like their last moments of Lotus and Machina's last moments, and later goes on into what the other members of the LDO are doing at the time. It's a
Yeah.
very interesting drama like that. And then we once again go to the I don't recall how they translated the gauntlet of what it was. I don't remember how
The Gauntlet of Malice.
the gauntlet of malice. Yes, which is basically a huge battle between all the warrior souls that had dropped into Reinhardt's Weltall, with the winner being allowed to receive anything he wants, Mephistopheles style. And, the last remaining ones are, of course, Lotus and Machina, because they're the strongest souls that dropped in there. And this is actually something that, it's a shame that they did it the way they did, because the drama is actually really cool. The drama is actually really cool in what it shows us. For example, it shows it, apparently...
Lotus uses a guillotine.
Yes, Merc, being the snack that he is, actually has them already instilled with the capability of using Hewikite, even though they don't technically have relics yet. And like you said, Lotus does actually use a guillotine in battle, and that guillotine actually attracts a lot of attention. Reinhard even remarks on it, and Merc kind of says to himself, yeah, that guillotine may end up being something that will be a threat to you.
Yes.
And then Lotus unfortunately gets defeated, and but it actually shows the Gauntlet of Malice in a better form.
It actually stops pretty soon after the fight itself, so anime actually expanded on it a bit.
It expanded on it a little bit. The game actually goes into it a little more, and it's actually a pretty complicated scene to analyze the differences. But and I agree. I don't exactly like what the anime did there, because I feel like what the game did was a little better. But to continue with this, the anime actually did something better, because the audio drama, being an audio drama, doesn't exactly have time for descriptive narration. It's a flow of consciousness. It has the characters saying what they're thinking and not so much what they're doing. So you actually see that the more people they defeat in the Gauntlet of Malice, the more souls they obtain. So it's kind of, it's a battle royale where the more you kill, the stronger you actually become. And in the end, and everyone they kill, they absorb. So when Machina kills Lotus, he actually absorbs his soul. So later on, Mercurius extracts it, and he extracts it in the form of an homunculus baby, which, everybody kind of took very oddly, because, we finally know who's his mommy and daddy are.
Mamachina, so to say.
Yes, Mamachina. God damn it, Swall. But
it's not mine.
But it's actually something that I like more in the visual novel, because you actually see a scene in Rare Root where you go into Machina's memories from the moment of his creation, and it's actually situated as Lotus and Machina basically being given a choice, and depending on the choice, they either become his representative or become the seventh seat of the Longinus Dreisen Orden. Basically, the way it's positioned, the way it's set, is like if Machina's craving was more like Lotus's, he may have well actually been the protagonist instead of Lotus, and Lotus would have been the seventh seat. And that's actually really cool. It just goes to show how they actually have out there, if you sum it down, their Lotus and Ren and Machina's ways of thinking are kind of a juxtaposition of each other.
Yeah.
Like, wanting the end versus wanting everything to continue forevermore. They're opposites of each other in a way. So, it's actually a really cool idea, and actually fits into the idea of Machina being the seat of the scales.
Yeah,
this
point wasn't really mentioned in the anime at all.
Yeah, it wasn't mentioned in the anime, and it's a shame, because it's a really good thing. He's the seat of the Gemini. Twins, brothers.
No, Gemini is Trifa. He is Libra.
No. No, not in terms of zodiac fortune. Machina is described as the seat of the scales.
Yeah.
So as the seat of the scale. Libra. Pardon. So it's really interesting how they did in the anime and the visual novel. And the anime kind of ended up skipping that and giving us a really weird kind of thing. I think that even if they just removed the whole homunculus baby thing, if you would have just extracted like a green orb out of Machina, it would have
Yeah.
been better. So and Machina's face was Machina's expression was
It
something.
sums up his opinion on Mercurius.
Yes, but it does actually go to show why he hates Mercurius so much, because he was basically said, "I want to die," and Mercurius said, "Yeah, put a hole in that."
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. But I do feel that this is kind of a point that's lost, the relationship
Yeah, I
between
agree.
Ren and Machina, because, and I don't like the whole Machina is the mom here thing, because it does kind of muddy the whole point of him being the twin brother, of him
Yeah.
being the brother of the
We
relation.
don't even have them calling each other Kamerad. We
Yes,
only have Senyu.
yes, and well, that's fine. That's
Yeah.
fine. Like, in a way, but it does kind of hurt, and it also, and I know that it doesn't happen in Mari Root. It happens in K Root, and it happens in Rhea Root. But him, since the
Oh,
anime does borrow stuff from other roots, I would have liked for him to call
yeah.
him.
We also have a short scene of Ren remembering his Lotus past and him almost calling Machina by his name.
Yeah.
But in the end, the anime never actually mentions his name, and I think that's actually okay because his name is not supposed to be said lightly. Like when it is said, it's always a very important scene. So just mentioning it.
I'd
Mm.
say this is an important enough scene for them, but
Well, yeah, but it was just a short flashback, and uh, him not being able to remember it is also a pretty strong image, I would say.
perhaps.
But
Okay, fine.
yeah, uh, as a Machina fan, I can say that it's not as good as I would have hoped. It does have a lot of clashes of their ideals, but not to the extent that you mentioned. Like, we don't really see how they come from each other. We don't see them being like two different serpents. It was mentioned in the visual novel how Ren is Caduceus and Machina is Ouroboros, for example. That's not mentioned at all.
Yeah.
We don't see Machina's flashback, which I was hoping to see in the anime, where he is again talking to Mercurius and has to figure out what exactly his craving is. Uh, all of this kind of brings me to uh, a general point about this anime, is that it doesn't tell everything, and I believe it does it consciously. Like, it wants to leave something for the anime viewers uh, uh, to
Read
learn in
Evian
the
for.
visual novel,
Yeah.
yes, in the manga, which is still ongoing and will have the rare route adapted. And if you are interested in everything that is kinda mentioned but not explained, you can still learn about it from other sources.
Mhm.
And from that angle, I do think that Machina's fight was okay. Like, my main gripe with it is actually the animation.
Yeah,
If
though
it was done,
I do feel like in general this entire scene, and it's not just in the anime, in the visual novel as well. It's kind of unfair for Machina because Mari basically completely counters his power at this
yeah,
point.
yeah,
She completely counters it because her power becomes like it allows all stories to continue,
yes.
and it completely counters Machina's power, which is ending all stories
But on the other
forcefully
hand, you kinda realize that he's so strong that only cheating can beat him. So,
until he gets completely hand waved in Ikabe.
yeah.
Yeah, but well. it's fine. That's unique circumstances, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah, it is a bit unfair, but it just goes to show just how powerful Mari has actually become
Yeah.
in a way.
Oh, and another point worth mentioning here is that his giant skeleton is not really doing anything, unlike Eleanor's or Schreiber's. Like you can see it like once over these two episodes, but that's about it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, we don't really miss it anyway. And I suppose that's it. We get to the beginning of the
Last
battle for the
episode.
throne. Yes, we get to uh, Reinhard saying Frohe Weihnachten because you might have forgotten because we haven't gotten Dies Irae, but it all happens on her birthday when she turns 18 years old, so she can uh, give birth to a new god of this world.
And it all takes place on Christmas.
Yes. And we have the Absolutares in their completion. Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually a part that they actually did okay.
Yeah. Uh, Again, whatever we get should not be taken for granted. The fact that they did give us two complete areas, which are some of the most important in the series, is nice to have.
And of course, Mercurius's line, which is the Dies Irae quote.
Yes. If you're watching this channel, you probably know what we're talking about. And I suppose we can finally go on to the final episode number 17, which is called To the New World, which obviously concerns the battle between Reinhardt and Ren. First, we have an overall clash of their emanations, which takes form of the Golden Beast and the Frozen Inferno. We have Mercurius receiving some considerable damage because of it. We see Isaac basically collapsing because he's not able to withstand the strain of his father's law. And we are transported over to the all too familiar Twilight Beach, which is basically the singularity of Mercurius's world. And he talks with Mara a bit, wants her to kill him, but she refuses because it would be cheating on her beloved, and he achieves his unknown and collapses his own law as well. And finally we have Ren delivering the finishing blow to Reinhard and him dissipating into thin air while leaving Ren with his hard-earned victory. And after all of this we have a short glimpse of Mari's world where Ren and the rest of his friends who are reincarnated come to visit old Kasumi in his on her hospital bed, and him finally meeting Mari in the new world. And acta est fabula, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Alright, so it was pretty weird to see the main battle only take one episode in the anime, but I do believe that it got handled pretty well in the end.
Yes, I actually agree. I expected much worse. From hearing it would only be one episode, I was expecting something far worse, and I was actually pretty okay with
Yeah,
the
we
result.
got a lot of cool imagery which wasn't in the visual novel, but is kinda retconned by Kajirika Moikagura and the like. We got the Golden Beast, which
I didn't like how it looks. I'm sorry.
yeah,
I did.
it's kinda wonky on the screenshot which is on the website, but some other shots were okay. It could have been done better, but no.
It,
But there is only
I,
one Gyusuke.
I didn't like the fact that it was made of Lego. I'm sorry. Like I didn't like the Minecraft lion. I would have
Minecraft.
yes, I would have preferred if it was like some kind of even big lion behind him just roaring and
Yeah,
that
yeah,
actually
like in the visual novel again.
yeah
It's
yeah
not the most complicated design that Gyusuke did.
yeah it's just a lion.
Yeah.
It's a very cool lion, but it's a lion. So no, I kind of felt like that they
Yeah,
used the
we
plot.
also got Ren growing some weird guillotine wings.
Yeah, that's towards the end. Yeah.
Yeah. I suppose he's the devil man now. We get his own visual representation of his law, which is kind of weird because it differs from what we have seen in Kajiri Kamui Kagura. It's a giant iceberg made of lotuses, which I
hmm
suppose makes sense, but it's still pretty weird.
Yeah, it's something that I've actually discussed with people before on Twitter, and it's an interesting point because in Kajiri Kamui Kakura, Ren is described as having excuse me described as having an incessant crimson hell,
Yes.
as it was translated by a very wise man, and this entire imagery was very much a burning hell. And everyone were a little baffled by the iceberg thing, but I don't think it's actually that odd because, well, nowadays we have this imagery, and I've mentioned this last episode as well. Nowadays we have this image ingrained into, by popular culture of hell being this fiery place of brimstone and lava and little horned demons with goat
Yeah, yeah.
legs and pitchforks, and people suffer there. While other images of the underworld, older images, are actually opposite of it. It's the underworld is actually frozen in other versions. For example, Hades has rivers of ice running through it, like Cutis, for example,
Yeah.
and Styx, and the river Styx. And even, the work that is the biggest influence on our vision on the Christian vision of hell, which is Dante's Divine Comedy,
Yes.
of course, had certain characters, like, for example, Odysseus. Odysseus is submerged in molten fire, but a lot of other characters, including Satan himself, are actually imprisoned in a frozen hell.
Yes.
And that's an interesting point. The turning point between a fiery hell and a a frozen hell and a burning hell. Now, we can see this also in Dies Irae Pantheon, where Ren's god form is kind of similar to his god form in Kajiri Kamui Kagura, but has an entirely different primary color.
Yeah.
In Kajiri Kamui Kagura, he's red. He has a very red, black, serpenty design. While in Dies Irae Pantheon, it's blue. More, shall we say, the blades are a little less, shall we say, sharpened and a little more complicated, and the snake motifs are mostly done away with.
Yeah.
Which I assume goes to show his independence from Mercurius. And this is an interesting point because the anime obviously tries to tie into Dies Irae Pantheon.
Yes.
And Ren's primary color, both in the visual novel as well, but also here, is blue, actually. So, there may be kind of an attempt to, show that Ren and Yato from Kajiri Kamui Kagura are actually a little different. They're like two points of two extremes of on the same spectrum, shall we say.
Yeah. And I do have to say that in Assassin's Crimson Hell is not necessarily Scorching Hell. We do have the Taikyoku of Great Scorching Hell in Kajiri Kamui Kagura.
Yes, we do.
Yes.
But that's just kind of the point. Like when I saw the ice, my response wasn't a nani. It was more of a nagihodo. It's like okay. I guess it stands to reason. Like, okay, no problem.
Yeah. Another small image of Kajiri Kamui Kagura can actually be seen on the website, where Mercurius is holding a small sphere of yin yang, which we call it yin yang in general culture, but it's actually a symbol of Taikyoku, which is one of the central themes of Kajiri Kamui Kagura, and which is basically the origins of all powers which gods have over the world.
And the term Taikyoku means, by the way, all of creation. It's one of the other titles for the throne is Shinza Banshou Taikyoku no Za.
Yes.
The throne of all creation and everything in existence.
Yeah. And speaking of which, we also get Mari's throne at the end of it, which is nice. And as you mentioned last time, it has some lotus flowers on it, which only reinforces the Ren's role into it coming into existence. But that's enough of going into tangents, I suppose. So the episode itself was, as we said, pretty nice. It had quite a few cameos from other LDO members. We have the infamous love letter aria from Eleanor. We have Rusalka, we have Wilhelm, we have Schreiber. We actually get Eleanor's Bria, which she doesn't use in her fight against Kay because she considers herself her unworthy of this honor. But we do see this huge gun barrel, and it looks basically exactly as I imagined, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. A point worth mentioning is that while this scene isn't as meticulated or as elaborate as it is in the visual novel, it does give us some interesting points, because basically almost every character, has an extra aria, which is more relates to their other name.
Yeah.
And we actually get a bit of that with Rusalka here. What with her, don't leave me alone, don't go, I will drag you down. That's something that's actually shown in the anime, which I'm happy that they did add, because I feel like it kind of puts her character into perspective. Because you got to realize that in the visual novel, like, you have so many arias.
Yes.
So many arias. It's hard to keep track. And the anime had to cut short on that, obviously, because the arias take a lot of time. It's also why a lot of the arias get shortened, and some of them even get cut.
Yes.
But they did take the time to add it here, and they do, like, show all more of the other LDO members appearing, like as giant skeletons behind them, and then bring their powers.
Which was pretty cool, too.
Yeah, it was nice. It was nice that they can basically call on them, and it's a good showing of the fact that Reinhardt can, in fact, use the power of every other LDO member.
Yes.
Which, is important.
Part of him.
Because they're a part of him, yes. But yes, that was nice. The battle itself was, the animation was actually nice. I wasn't...
Yeah, actually I agree. It had a lot of generic skeletons, but overall it was well done.
Yeah, and it was actually, also very well, also cool in how it showed how Ren's craving and Ren's emanation is actually about as bad as Reinhardt's, because you see Reinhardt, draining souls and turning everyone into skellies, but you also see Ren raising everyone.
Yeah. So it's not really about one being stronger than the other. They are on about the same level, but
Level, yes.
at the same time they are at about the same uh, degree of I don't want to say evil, but they are about as harmful to the world as the
Yes,
other.
and speaking of world, we actually see their emanation going all over the world to other countries, and you can see how basically their battle isn't just going over Suahara; it's going over
Yeah.
everything, and it's I think that this is the sense of scale that the visual novel kind of didn't go into, but it
Yeah,
was
it was
nice.
basically just mentioning like Ren wanted to stop the emanation from happening before it
It spread
yeah
before it spread,
before it
but
spread. But here we see that it does spread. It's just that Ren himself takes one uh, side and Reinhardt takes the other.
yes, and it's an interesting thing because because it like writer just says that like it's a canvas, and if you try to put too many colors or like move your move your brush too hard on the canvas, it will form a tear. And you can actually see it's actually convincing with them fighting in this intensity. Yes, reality would crack,
Yes, and it did.
and there's also of course him having a crack in his face, Mercurius, to
Yes.
symbolize the hole in the canvas being the world being his law, his law being him. And it's actually something that Masada does a lot. The imagery of the crack appearing on a character's face. It actually happens to Hajun in a way, and it even happens, interestingly enough, it happens to Satanael in Paradise Lost,
Oh.
before he even ascends to godhood.
I
Um,
can also remember Reinhardt having some cracks in Ika Bay.
right. I was about to say that.
Yeah.
So yeah, the imagery of the crack is something that appears a lot. So no, it was a nice little touch they added there.
Yeah.
Then there's the singularity. Reinhard, Reinhard and Ren appearing.
There is still no garbage bag, Mercurius.
Yes, he's still in his 1940s suit here,
Yes.
which is a shame.
But at least
Um,
we do realize that it's not his actual self appearing. It's pretty heavily implied that it's only his projection, his
yep,
sensory.
yep.
So that's good. Uh,
And
well,
it's an interesting point because later on in Railroad, when they actually face him on the throne, Reinhardt actually does comment, and it's technically the first time he's really seeing him.
yeah.
It's
So,
yeah.
anyway, then we have, um well, there is the Moses scene, but more importantly, we have Mercurius's final dialogue with Mari, where he explains to her what exactly her craving is, and she tries to understand it herself because while she does want to do what Ren says, she also understands that his craving is not what she would like to see the world experience. And because of that, she comes down to her own terms, where she wants just everyone to be happy and and for her to embrace everyone,
It's
except
actually
for
not exact.
Mercurius.
That's not exactly how it went, actually, because she actually insisted that no, I should go with Ren because me and Ren we want the same thing. And Reinhard and Ren, excuse me, Mercurius and Ren both tell her no, no, it is
Yeah,
not.
yeah,
And she insists, no, I need to go with him. There's no way he would do anything wrong. We want the same thing. And no, listen, no. It's a bad idea to let him emanate. Don't. And, and you have and you have Mercurius admitting that both Reinhard and Ren are terrible throne candidates because their laws are not conductive to actual human existence.
Yep,
which is
basically.
that's pretty good. And then there's the infamous cooking scene that's coming on.
Let's put it that way. Okay.
Netorare, yes, into yard, and
Oh,
um,
another point here is that uh, the visual novel used
a different track.
yes, different track. It was Shade and Darkness, which actually was the very first song we have heard of Dies Irae, I believe. It was published along with the Werewolf audio drama, which, as I have mentioned before, came out before the visual novel even came out. And I can see why it wasn't used here. Maybe it's just because it's way too old and they may not even have the rights to use it anymore.
Maybe that's it, yeah. But
Uh,
I do kind of miss it. I know some people. I've seen some people be like, "Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
well, I have to.
Jublius is better." So I don't know.
Well, I
Jublius.
do have to say that for some reason it's an unpopular opinion, but I do believe that Jubilees is the best visual novel opening so far.
No, Jublius is a great song. It's a great Sakakibira Yuri song.
Yeah.
I like Jublius a lot, but I do feel that I don't know. Maybe this is just me being old fashioned, but that song has become so synonymous with that scene.
Yeah, I suppose. I
It
suppose.
became it became so recognized with that scene. And I don't know. It's like like that. The image I have this like when I listen to that song, I can hear Mercurius laughing for the first time in his life, in his existence, over the feeling of having what he wants robbed from him, of actual surprise for the first time in existence. It connects to me. The image of Reinhard dissipating into the light. All
Yes.
of that is like condensed into Shade and Darkness, and it's a shame that's not there for me. I mean, it's not a big deal. It's not a huge deal.
Well, I
They did
suppose.
end they did end up giving us an OP as an insert song here. So no, I can't exactly. So no, it's not exactly a huge complaint. It's fan nitpicking. It really is fan
Yeah.
nitpicking.
Uh,
Um,
on another note, we also have the epilogue, which uh, is a bit more concerning to me actually because it only shows the Ren side of the new world. Even though the villains are basically the main heroes of the story, we don't actually see them being happy in the new world.
let me just kind of like what you just said here is a little unspecified.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
The after credits are an adaptation of of the fourth side story, which is Mari's after story, which is I think it's Neil DiFicliamanti.
Yeah,
I think it's called.
yeah, yeah,
So nothing can stand in front of love.
yeah.
I think is the correct translation for it.
I believe
And
so.
basically, the way it starts is that you see the reincarnated forms of Rusalka, Schreiber, Eleanor, Beatrice, Lisa,
Triffer,
Triffa.
Spine, Reinhardt,
So,
Isaac.
to be more exact, you have Isaac, and later on also the Spine and Reinhardt appear as well.
Yeah,
But the big CG, the famous CG of that scene, is having those seven characters that I mentioned.
yeah,
Um, and you have them reincarnated, and they're in modern clothes, and they're all very pretty, GUK art, and it's a very cute, funny scene, and a little bittersweet because you can see like that they've actually, transcended their karma, transcended their cursed past, and are now you improved people. And then you actually jump to the end. Now, another point that, like the anime kind of skimmed over, is that you see Mercurius disappearing. as he's laughing
Yeah,
maniacally.
yeah,
Thing.
right.
While in the visual novel, in the ending of Mari's Route, you actually see that Mercurius is actually still alive. He's just powerless. And the only one he can communicate with is Ren, who is currently immortal and has to put up with Mercurius buzzing in his ear for the rest of eternity. Even though Mercurius promised he wouldn't, I don't trust him, he will. Now,
Pretty much.
now the thing is, Mercurius at this point promises him that after enough time on the throne, she will likely develop her own sensory, and there may be a chance of them reuniting. And this all happens as he visits Marguerite Brule's grave in France. And it ends with him saying that he wants to meet her again on the rooftop with everyone, and Mari
Yeah,
going,
that entire scene got cut too, by the way.
that entire scene got cut too, and her going, that would be nice, and he like hearing her voice despite the fact that she's now in the throne and doesn't physically exist, and that's like all nice. And fast forward to the second half of the side story, and we basically get what we see in the anime.
Yeah, basically.
Now, in the anime, we see Kasumi in the hospital, assuming that she's had some kind of health-related event because she's already very old, and she is visited by a interesting group of people, voiced by some very specific voice actors,
Yes.
and we actually see the designs for their reincarnated forms, which we don't see. They don't have sprites, they don't have CGs. We just hear their voices and we know who they are. But that's pretty nice. And the setting here, and it's a little unclear, but the setting here is that in the future, Kasumi basically wants to become a teacher, which is very dubious given how dumb she is.
Well,
Sorry, sorry. But
it all turns out fine in Kajiri, so
yes, it does. So she basically becomes a teacher and ends up running an orphanage, and with another character that we won't mention here because she's not relevant right now. But she basically becomes a teacher, and she's visited by her former students who are now all grown up and adults, and she sees them, and she's very happy to see these kids who she has a feeling she knows from somewhere, all grown up and having achieved happiness. And then Ren visits her in the hospital. She recognizes him. She shies him for being a really shitty friend. And then a certain little girl walks in, and Ren basically sees Mari's reincarnated form, now free of any horrible curses, capable of touching and loving everyone.
yeah.
And, it's a very touching end, and you have Kasumi looking onto them lovingly, knowing that she's finally did what she's kind of been meant to do. And you see Mari watching over them lovingly from the throne, and it's a very touching ending.
Yeah. I'm not saying it's bad, I just think that it wasn't as good as it could have been.
Well, given the amount of time they had to put in. I mean, the anime is very Mari focused. Let's just say that. And it is a pity that we don't see the LDO members getting redeemed, because I feel like a lot of the catharsis that you get from finishing Dies Irae is from seeing these deplorable human beings get redeemed and reborn and improved, and living life as normal good people is a very like I said, it's very cathartic, and you don't get that in the anime, sadly.
Yeah, okay, so mm, I do think that it was a pretty good ending, and uh, they didn't uh, they didn't put like any hijinks at the end, so I should be thankful for that at least.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Mm, alright, so we can I think that about does it for episode 17, and we can discuss anime in general. So, what now that we have all 18 episodes, how does it feel? Is the world better with the anime?
I don't think the anime is as bad as people say it is. People say that the anime was a mistake, the anime was bad, the anime was shitty. I don't think it's quite that simple. The anime is a mixed bag. It did some things good, it did some things bad.
Yeah, basically.
Like, I think that like the optimistic way of looking at it would be to take away the good parts and try to ignore the bad parts. But of course, people, the internet being
the other way around.
yeah, of course, the internet being the internet, the people have to treat everything ironically, to take everything as a joke. It's how the internet works. And people like to point out the kinks in the anime, like the silly parts, the badly animated parts, the silly faces, the bad quality here and there. Everyone takes the anime as this, but I don't regret the anime was made. And I've said this from the get-go. I don't regret that the anime was made. I think the anime did some things good and had an effect even beyond. Its effects are felt way beyond just the anime itself. It was okay. In the end, like I don't regret watching it.
Yeah, same. I actually even paid money for it, and I do believe that I got my money's worth out of it. Even if it could have been done better at some points.
Yeah, and
the overall impact of the story is still there. The ending is still good. The final battle is about what people expected out of it. Like, my main gripes with it are in the very beginning, really.
I guess, and it's something that once again people are gonna. I guess some people are might listen to this and think, "Wow, listen to these anime shills. They're gonna defend the anime no matter what it does." And no, not at all. Believe me, that like us being big fans of the series, of the visual novel, who have put in a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of emotion. We started a subgroup. We started a podcast over this. We would have liked to see the anime get something like a Fate adaptation, like a UFO table tier thing. We would have. We definitely would have. We want this to be. We would have wanted the best possible adaptation for it, and we definitely do feel that it could have been better. It could have been much better. But given the circumstances, we take away what's good from it, and we try to And in general, it's worth saying this: Dies Irae, for how good of a visual novel it is, from the moment of its conception, was always rife with troubles. Always had.
Yeah.
It kept stepping on more and more landmines as things went on. It's like one of the more troubled visual novel releases in general.
Yes.
And I think that's part of what makes the story of its success unique, because it's still relatively successful as visual novels go. It's not Fate, but good luck being as popular as Fate nowadays. It's still fairly popular. It's still one of the bigger visual novel franchises in terms of how much it's growing over the past few years.
True.
And all this despite all of the shortcomings it's had for the last 10 years. You got to realize the visual novel's initial release was, as we've described in the past, it was very problematic.
Yes.
And the anime is very problematic, and everything about it is all sorts of Light is a very weird studio and how it is a very weird company and how it does things. Not all of the things it does make sense to us, and they still, despite Light apparently always tripping over themselves, somehow Dies Irae is as successful as it is.
Yeah.
So, maybe these flaws are part of what makes it as unique as it is. So,
Maybe. Okay, so overall, uh, this might not be the last time we talk about the anime, so we can go back to it if we get some questions about it, and we can
sure.
discuss some separate points of it which we might have missed, I don't know, the opening and ending songs.
Sure.
There is a very distinct lack of Kasai on our podcast.
There is.
Anyway, so we did discuss it way longer than I expected, so I suppose we shouldn't waste any more time and get to the questions we got. We actually got only one tweet this time, but it got a lot of
Questions in it.
a lot of questions. Yes, it's by Contractor, and he wants to ask us who are our favorite characters.
Well, gee, I wonder.
Well, okay, besides the most obvious ones.
Okay, well, I'll go first. Well, of course, the obvious one is Risaka for me. In terms of the heroines, I also really like Kay. I also, of course, have a fondness for Mari. She's she's adorable. She's a great girl. She's our goddess. On top of that, Shira is great. Wilhelm is great. Machina is great. Reinhardt, of course, goes without saying. And pretty much, kind of everyone in a way. I mean,
Yeah, pretty much.
it's a very strong cast, but of the ones that stand out to me, those are the ones.
Yeah, for me, the first is Machina. After him go, in no particular order, Trifa, Eleanor, Rhea, Kasumi, Kai, and even Schreiber to some extent. Right, so next question. What makes you passionate about Shinza?
Oh, wow.
It's a pretty tough question to answer, but I suppose for me it's the way Masada combines all of the different mythologies from all over the world into his own worldview, which actually doesn't make them seem disjointed. It all makes sense together, it all comes together into a complete whole. And this talent is what I really find fascinating about this series in general.
For me, it's what you said. Of course, the way he combines different religions to each other in a way that that makes sense. They don't clash with each other. And it does kind of it's an important part, because as you read this visual novel, you run into these things, and a lot of it rings familiar. It's all part of things that are ingrained into the culture. So when you see them,
you have this foreknowledge, so to say.
In a way, yes, and it also really inspires you to read up, and you spend so much time on Google.
Yes.
With the game tabbed out while you're in Google reading about these myths and these characters. Now, but the other thing for me is the character cast, and it's a very, very well written character cast. Each and every character has such strong, spelled out, relatable motivations. That you care for these characters, and their performances. It's really everything put on top of each other. The performances, the voice actors, and how they put life into every character. It wouldn't be the same without them. Like the first version of Dies Irae, of Alsace Zarathustra, had Renan voiced, and I can't imagine
he
even.
Wasn't voiced actually.
I think he wasn't voiced, from what I understand. I think his voice only got added in Die Wunderkunst. And that's that's pretty horrible. Imagine Dies Irae without Ren's voice. How empty
I
that
better
is.
not.
Yeah, I might actually end up reading that version at one point out of morbid curiosity. So I will report back with the horrible findings when I do. But yeah, it's a lot. It's the voice actors. It's the writing style. Masuda's writing style is amazing. It's the characters themselves. It's everything, really. Everything comes together. It's the kind of, it's like, I say this a lot. Light are a very weird company. They make a lot of questionable plays, but what saves them is the fact that they just have so many amazing minds on board. Yusuke's art, Masuda's writing, Keishi's soundtracks, the voice actors, everything just comes together and creates this really amazing opera that you can't ignore. So that's Shinza in a nutshell.
That pretty much flows into our next questions. What do you like and dislike about this? So I suppose all these things that we have explained are
What we liked,
answers. Yes, what we like and what we dislike about it. Well, the common route is way too long, I suppose, and it does need a bit less of Ren's daily life. While I do understand that it's important to understand his motivation,
I don't know
it
about.
could have been done in about half as much time.
I don't know about that because, I'm pretty sure if I'll ask you what exactly do you think needs to be cut, you'd be hard pressed for an answer. Like,
Well, yeah, I suppose.
even if you go through it, I don't think you'll be it won't be easy to find scenes that you actually think need to be cut. Because they all kind of provide information, they all kind of provide build-up, but I think the big problem is that, Ren spends the majority of the common road being relatively powerless, and it's kind of annoying because you see these amazing character designs, you see this amazing opening, the visuals, and everything is so conductive to all this fast-paced, hard action, and you spend like the first 10 hours of the game not getting it.
Yeah,
and it's kind of kind of annoying, but kind of disappointing.
yeah.
But yeah, pretty much like you said, first root syndrome for Kasumi, got the short end of the stick. And generally, it's a very verbose visual novel. It's a slog at times.
Yeah, I
It's
suppose.
long. I mean, I like Masuda's prose. I do, but it's a slog. It's long. Some chapters take forever to finish. Um, you know, Basically, again, but it's something that, it's kind of a bad thing and kind of not a bad thing because it's kind of part of the game's personality. Like, it's very like Muramasa in that regard.
Yeah,
I'm sorry
yeah.
that I'm bringing up a game that's kind of unrelated here, but Muramasa has a lot of this issue as well. The game is a slog. The first parts are kind of slow. Exposition, exposition, exposition. But at the same time, I'd be hard pressed to find a part that I actually think needs to be cut or shortened because, I don't know, in the end, it kind of ends up becoming part of the game's kind of charming personality in a way. So yeah, it's,
It's a
a bit of a,
representation of the world's god, I suppose.
I guess, yeah. But yes, it's part of their personality, and I think that's a lot of why Narahara, Muramasa's scenario writer, and Masuda end up getting lumped together a lot, because they're very similar in this regard. But it's part of the game's personality in a lot of ways.
Yep. Alright, so the next question is could you make discussions about single characters and other aspects of the work?
Of course, we would
Yes.
love to.
Yes.
Just we ask you every single week, what would you like us to talk about, and bring on the suggestions. Name the
Yep.
characters, name the aspects, anything you want us to talk about.
Basically,
We would be glad to go into it. Except for discussions regarding power levels and versus battle making. We don't want to talk about that. But
Well, we can explain to you why it's all wrong, but
yes, we
if
can.
you would really
But
like to listen to it.
yes, but other than that, any aspect we can, as you can see, we're already 3 hours talking today.
Yeah,
Not for hours on hours on end about Dies Irae. So that's definitely something.
yeah. Right, and the last question: who is best girl and why is it Kay?
And it's Rusalka because it's Rusalka.
Yeah, done.
No,
We're done here.
no. Kay is a good girl though. Kay is a great
Yes.
heroine. I think she's out of the four heroines, she's probably my favorite in terms of love interest. For Ren. Like I said, she has the best chemistry with him. Their kiss scene is known as one of the visual novel's most beloved scenes because it's two dorks
Yep.
being sympathetic for each other, and it's charming. Kay is great. I love Kay. I like Maria a lot as well, and I like Rusalka the best for my own personal reasons. But to each his own. I don't disrespect people for liking the other girls because all the
They're good
girls, yes,
in the end.
they're all good. They're all good girls in the end.
Yes. Right, so that's it for your questions. Don't forget to send us more. Actually, this time you can ask us about our next subject, because as you might have guessed, we have finished our discussion of the anime adaptation, and now we are kinda up in the air. We uh, do want to discuss something else, and for now we have decided that our next subject will be a
Character
certain,
study.
yes, a certain impaler who actually turned 101 this week, and it's Wilhelm. So our next episode will be dedicated to everyone's favorite albino vampire, and you can ask us any questions about him, be it about his character, about our opinion on him, about his story, and whatever. As it will be our very first attempt at discussing a single character over a single episode of the podcast, I'm not sure how it will turn out, but hopefully it will be
We'll roll with the punches.
yes, as entertaining as it is right now. And until when, we bid you farewell. Auf Wiedersehen.
Goodbye.